please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would everybody please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Senator Merrifield, the usual.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the reading of the Journal of Thursday, April 14, 2016 be dispensed with and the Journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
I think we would like that in song, please. Please. It's Friday.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the Journal of Thursday, April 14, 2016 be dispensed with and the Journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
Thank you. You have heard the motion twice. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted as well as the Journal. Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Colleagues?
Mr. President, I promise to only do this once every 35 years. But it's my privilege and honor to have a young lady with me today who I married 35 years ago next Monday. But she's here today, so my wife, Sandy, I want you to give her a good welcome. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
You still have to buy her a gift. Committee reports.
April 14, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Marriage Committee recommends following House Bill 1225 be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar. April 14, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Marriage Committee recommends following House Bill 1375 be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation. April 14, 2016, Committee on Education, after consideration of the Marriage Committee recommends following House Bill 1171 be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar. April 14, 2016, Mr. President, the Committee on Education has had under consideration as that a hearing on the following appointments recommends the appointments be placed on the recommends the appointments be confirmed. Members of the Charter School Institute Board for terms expiring July 1, 2017. Anthony Scott Lewis of Longmont, Colorado, serves as a member with experience as a charter school board member or founder of a charter school experience as a public school administrator with experience working with charter schools, other board or public service experience, and as a Democrat reappointed for terms expiring July 1, 2018. Curtis Matthew Indoor from Denver, Colorado, serves as a member with experience as a charter school board member or founder of a charter school experience as a public school administrator with experience working with charter schools, other board or public service experience, and as a Democrat appointed. April 14, 2016, Mr. President, the Committee on Education has had under consideration as a hearing on the following appointments recommends the appointments be placed on the consent calendar and confirmed. Board of Trustees for the University of Northern Colorado, effective December 31, 2015, for terms expiring December 31, 2019. Paul E. Washington of Boulder, Colorado, Democrat, reappointed. Kevin Walter Aaron of Morrison, Colorado, Republican, reappointed. April 14, 2016, Mr. President, the Committee on Education has had under consideration as that hearing on the following appointments recommends the appointments be placed on the consent calendar and confirmed. Members of the Board of Trustees of Metropolitan State University of Denver for terms expiring December 31st, 2019. Jeff Shoemaker of Denver, Colorado, serves as a Republican appointed. Wendy J. Dominguez of Littleton, Colorado, to serve as a Republican appointed. April 14, 2016, Committee on Finance, after consideration, the Marriage Committee recommends the following: Senate Bill 38 be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation with the recommendation be placed on the consent calendar. April 14, 2016, Committee on Finance, after consideration, the Marriage Committee recommends the following: Senate Bill 175 be postponed indefinitely. April 14, 2016, Mr. President, the Committee on Health and Human Services, that under consideration as that hearing on the following appointments, recommends the appointments be confirmed. Members of the University of Colorado Hospital Authority Board of Directors from the 2nd Congressional District, Dory Beister, for a term effective July 1, 2015, and continue until June 30, 2019, or until her successor is appointed by the Board of Regents. This will be Ms. Besser's first term as the Director of the Hospital Authority. From the 3rd Congressional District, Steve Meyer, for a term effective July 1, 2015, and continuing until June 30th, 2019, or until his successor is appointed by the Board of Regents. This will be Mr. Meyer's first term as the Director of the Hospital Authority. From the 6th Congressional District, Abel Jones, for a term effective May 1, 2016, and continuing until April 30th, 2020, or until her successor is appointed by the Board of Regents. This will be Ms. Jones' first term as the Director of the Hospital Authority. April 14, 2016, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following House Bill 1101 be amended as follows and also amended before the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation. April 14, 2016, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of the Mayor's Committee recommends following House Bill 1336 be amended as follows and also amended before the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation.
Senate Services.
April 15, 2016, correctly engrossed Senate Bills 111, 156, 172, and 177, correctly re-engrossed Senate Bill 142. Correctly revised House Bill 1156, 1268, 1317, and 1335, correctly enrolled Senate Bill 1685, 126, and 133, Senate Joint Resolutions 25 and 27.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I move that the Senate proceed out of order for the purposes of considering Senate Memorial 2.
You've heard the motion that the Senate proceed out of order. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will proceed out of order for the consideration of memorial. Mr. Majors, colleagues.
Senate Memorial 2 by Senator Tate, memorializing former Senator Carl Michael Williams.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Memorial 16-002 and ask that it be read at length.
Whereas, our respected former colleague, Carl Michael Williams, a past member of the Colorado State Senate, departed this life on November 27, 2015, at the age of 87. And whereas the fourth son of a prominent ranching family, Senator Williams was born on Friday, November 9th, 1928, to the late John Walter and Eleanor Powers Williams in Douglas, Wyoming. And whereas Senator Williams was raised and educated in Douglas, graduating from Converse County High School, where he went on to attend the University of Wyoming, graduated from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and later received his Juris Doctor from the University of Wyoming. And whereas during the Korean conflict, Senator Williams enrolled with the Wyoming Air National Guard, serving from September 14, 1950 to March 31, 1951. And whereas Senator Williams was called to active duty in the United States Air Force, serving from April 1st, 1951 to December 31st, 1952, where he flew both the famed P-51 Mustang and America's first jet fighter, the F-80 Shooting Star, thus beginning his lifelong love and passion for aviation. And whereas in 1957, Senator Williams fell in love with Jenny Williams, a fiery Virginia school teacher who came west to make her mark in the world and moved to Denver and had 2 children, Ellie and Mike. And whereas also in that year, after practicing law for fewer than 4 months, Senator Williams partnered with cable legend Bill Daniels and became one of the founding fathers of America's budding cable television industry. And whereas after branching out on his own in the early 1960s, Senator Williams went on to build Televents Incorporated with systems throughout Wyoming, Colorado, California, Montana, Pennsylvania, and Florida, and he eventually sold Televents Incorporated in 1986 to friend and fellow Coloradan Bob Magnus, making it part of the Telecommunication Incorporated, better known as TCI, which went on to become the largest cable TV provider in the United States. And whereas while building Televents Incorporated, Senator Williams was elected to the Colorado State Senate in 1968, where he served as the chairman of the State Senate Affairs Committee, and later went on to serve as chairman of the Colorado Republican Party from 1975 to 1977, providing leadership and resolve in uncertain times and remaining active in state and national politics for the rest of his life. And whereas a tireless philanthropist, Senator Williams actively pursued and fought for the advancement of ethics and values in education, which led him to establish and fund programs including the Carl M. Williams Chair for Ethics at the University of Wyoming and the Carl M. Williams Institute of Ethics and Values at the University of Denver. And whereas always an advocate for higher education, Senator Williams generously provided college tuition for a myriad of young people and assisted in providing funds for a skywalk between the Douglas Senior Citizen Center and Riverside Plaza Apartments, a wood floor at the Douglas High School Gymnasium, donating to capital construction at Memorial Hospital of Converse County, and many other endeavors in his beloved home of Douglas, Wyoming. And whereas in 1989, Senator Williams founded the Foundation for Drug Education and served on numerous educational, artistic, medical, and legal boards of directors during the years. And whereas among the many charities that were dear to him were the Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, from which he received a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2004, the Arthritis Foundation, the Greenway Foundation, the Episcopal Church, and the Colorado Symphony. And whereas in 1997, Senator Williams was inducted into the Colorado Aviation Hall of Fame. And whereas Senator Williams' deep-rooted passion for biplanes could be traced back to his father, who owned an Alexander Eagle Rock, a plane manufacturer in Colorado Springs. So beloved was the Eagle Rock to Senator Williams that he restored not one, but two examples, the first of which is on prominent display in Concourse B at Denver International Airport, and the second at Wings Over the Rockies' new Centennial Airport facility. And whereas even during retirement, Senator Williams, well into his 70s, continued to pursue his love of aviation, competing at the intermediate level in national and aerobatic competitions, flying the legendary Pitts Special biplane. And whereas the most important things in life to Senator Williams, and the three things that always rose to the surface with him, were civic responsibility, family, and faith. And whereas it is fitting that we, the members of the Colorado State Senate, pay tribute to the dedicated service of Senator Williams and express our deep regret and sorrow occasioned by his death. Now therefore be resolved by the Senate of the 70th General Assembly of the State of Colorado that in the death of Carl Michael Williams, the people of the state of Colorado have lost a dedicated public servant and outstanding citizen, and that we, the members of the Colorado State Senate of the 70th General Assembly, do hereby extend our deep and heartfelt sympathy to the members of his family and pay tribute to a man who served the state well and faithfully. Be it further resolved that copies of this memorial be sent to Senator Williams' wife, Ginny Williams, his daughter, Ellie P. Williams, and son, Mike Williams.
Colleagues, please be seated. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the memorial does a great job explaining and outlining the wonderful contributions that Senator Williams made to the state of Colorado. Obviously, if you look at the dates in the document as well as the portrait to my right, I did not serve with Senator Williams in the Senate, but I did have the serendipity in the last 10 days actually to discuss with friends of Senator Williams this memorial. I ran into Dick Wadhams, a political name here, ran into former Governor Bill Owens this past week, as well as University of Colorado President Bruce Benson, all who are well acquainted with Senator Williams, and all spoke deeply of their appreciation of his friendship and what Senator Williams meant to them as a friend. That's something that really sometimes doesn't come through in a memorial when we outline accomplishments and contributions, but I was struck by the power of the friendship that they still cherish. And thank you, members, for honoring former Senator Williams. And this time I'd like to call your attention to Senator Williams' family over here to my left. His son Mike Williams, his lovely wife, and Mr. Williams' associate to his left. Thank you for coming. And just as a brief note from this morning and talking with Mike, he hasn't been here in a while. He came here as a very young person when his father was in the Senate in the early 70s, and so hopefully this is bringing back some good memories for you. Thank you so much for coming.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Memorial 2. A roll call has been requested. and the chimes shall ring. Mr. Majors.
Senators Aguilar. Aguilar, aye. Baumgardner.
Excused.
Carroll. Carroll, aye. Cook. Cook, aye. Crowder. Crowder, aye. Donovan. Donovan, aye. Garcia. Garcia, aye. Grantham. Grantham, aye. Guzman. Guzman, aye. Heath. Heath, aye. Hill. Hill, aye. Hodge.
Excused.
Holbert. Holbert, aye. John. John, aye. Johnston. Johnston, aye. Jones. Jones, aye. Kafalis. Kafalis, aye. Kerr. Kerr, aye. Lambert. Lambert, aye. Lundberg. Lundberg, aye. Marble. Marble, aye. Martinez Humenic. Martinez Humenic, aye. Merrifield. Merrifield, aye. Neville. Neville, aye. Newell. Newell, aye. Roberts. Roberts, aye. Sheffel. Sheffel, aye. Scott.
Excused.
Sonnenberg.
Excused.
Stedman.
Excused.
Tate. Tate, aye. Todd. Todd, aye. Ulibarri. Ulibarri, aye. Woods. Woods, aye. Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. President, aye.
With 30 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 5 excused, Senate Memorial 2 is adopted. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Without objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Colleagues, let's thank the senator's family again for joining us, and then we will take a brief recess to greet them. Thank you for joining us. The Senate will stand in a brief recess. The Senate will come back to order. Majority Leader Shefflin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate continue to proceed out of order for the purposes of consideration of House Joint Resolution 13.
The motion is to proceed out of order. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will proceed out of order. Mr. Majors.
House Joint Resolution 1013 by Representatives Windholz and Rosenthal and Senator Lundberg concerning atrocities against Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Joint Resolution 1013 and ask that it be read at length.
I'll be right back. I'm going to go just poke my head in my hoppy thing.
Okay.
Whereas those who commit or support atrocities against Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities, including Yazidis, Turkmen, Sabian Mandayans, Kake, Shia, and Kurds, and who target them specifically for ethnic or religious reasons, intend to exterminate or to force the migration or submission of anyone who does not share their views concerning religion. And whereas Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities have been an integral part of the cultural fabric of the Middle East for millennia, and whereas Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities have been murdered, subjugated, forced to emigrate, and have suffered grievous bodily and psychological harm, including sexual enslavement and abuse, inflicted in a deliberate and calculated manner in violation of the laws of their respective nations, the laws of war, laws and treaties forbidding crimes against humanity, and the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, signed in Paris on December 9, 1948, the Convention. And whereas these atrocities are undertaken with a specific intent to bring about the eradication and displacement of their communities and the destruction of their cultural heritage in violation of local laws, the laws of war, laws and treaties that punish crimes against humanity, and the Convention. And whereas local, national, and international laws and treaties, as well as the Convention, condemn murder, massacre, forced migration, extrajudicial punishment, kidnapping, slavery, human trafficking, torture, rape, and persecution of individuals based upon their religion, and these crimes shall be punished whether they are committed by constitutionally responsible rulers, public officials, or private individuals. And whereas Article 1 of the Convention and international and local laws confirm that genocide and crimes against humanity, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, are crimes that our governmental authorities are obligated to prevent and to punish. And whereas Article 2 of the Convention declares that genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Whereas Article 3 of the Convention affirms that the following acts shall be punishable. A, genocide. B, conspiracy to commit genocide. C, direct and public incitement to commit genocide. D, attempt to commit genocide. And E, complicity in genocide. And whereas a March 13, 2015 report of the United Nations Committee on Human Rights prepared at the request of the government of Iraq stated, ethnic and religious groups targeted by ISIL include Yazidis, Christians, Turkmen, Sabian Mandayans, Kake, Kurds, and Shia, and that it is reasonable to conclude that some of the incidents in Iraq in 2014 and 2015 may constitute genocide. And whereas attacks on Yazidis include the mass killing of men and boys and the enslavement and forcible transfer of women and children. And whereas on July 10, 2015, Pope Francis, Supreme Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church, declared that Middle Eastern Christians are facing genocide, a reality that must be denounced, and that in this Third World War waged piecemeal, which we are now experiencing, a form of genocide is taking place and it must end. Now therefore be resolved by the House of Representatives of the 70th General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the Senate concurring herein, that we, the members of the General Assembly, find that the atrocities committed against Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities who are targeted specifically for religious reasons constitute and are hereby declared to be crimes against humanity and genocide, and each of the contracting parties to the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, signed in Paris on December 9, 1948, and to other international agreements forbidding war crimes and crimes against humanity, particularly the governments of countries and their nationals who are in any way supporting these crimes, are reminded of their legal obligations under the Convention and those international agreements. And every government and multinational body should call the atrocities being committed in the name of religion by their rightful names: crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. And the United Nations and the United Nations Secretary General should assert leadership by calling the atrocities being committed in these places by their rightful names: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And the member states of the United Nations, with an urgent appeal to the Arab states that wish to uphold religious freedom, tolerance, and justice, A, should join this resolution, B, should collaborate on measures to prevent further war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and C, should collaborate on the establishment and operation of domestic, regional, and international tribunals to punish those responsible for the ongoing crimes. And the governments of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, the Lebanese Republic, and other countries, including Turkey, Greece, the United States of America, and the member states of the European Union, are commended for having sheltered and protected those fleeing the violence of ISIS, Daesh, and other extremists until they can safely return to their homes in Iraq and Syria. And all those who force the migration of religious communities from their ancestral homelands, where they have lived and practiced their faith in safety and stability for hundreds of years, including specifically the Nineveh Plain, a historic heartland of Christianity in Iraq, and Mount Sinjar, the historic home of the Yazidis, should be tracked, sanctioned, arrested, prosecuted, and punished in accordance with the laws of the place where the crimes were committed and under applicable international criminal statutes and conventions. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to President Barack Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Harry Reid, Minority Leader of the United States Senate, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, Majority Leader, United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, Minority Leader, United States House of Representatives, Colorado's Congressional Delegation, the Syrian American Council, the African Community Center of Denver, Lutheran Family Services, the Colorado Coalition for Genocide Awareness and Action, the Congregational Prayer Caucus Foundation, the St. Rafka Mission of Hope and Mercy, former Colorado State Senator Thomas J. Weens, Peter Boyles, and Father Andre Y. Mahana.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. I also have an amendment that I am submitting and would like to have it read at length as well.
Mr. Majors, would you please read House Joint Resolution 1013L001?
Amendment L001, House Joint Resolution 1013 by Senator Lundberg. Amended Gross Joint Resolution, page 3, after line 8, insert, whereas hundreds of thousands of Middle East Christian and Yazidi refugees from the genocidal attacks in Syria and Iraq often cannot find safe haven in the refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan that are operated by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and instead find safety and humanitarian assistance only in camps and programs run by private nonprofit organizations, resulting in a very low number of Christians being admitted to the United States through the official refugee resettlement program operated by the Department of State and the Department of Health and Human Services, which has brought more than 2,000 refugees to Colorado annually in recent years. And page 4, line 24, strike conventions and substitute conventions, and page 4, line after line 24, insert parentheses 8. Tens of thousands of Christian refugees from the Middle East fleeing genocide who otherwise meet the qualifications for refugee status should be accorded P2 or Priority 2 status by the Department of State, thereby giving them special consideration as refugees, a special status afforded in past decades to Christians fleeing communist oppression in the Soviet Union and Cuba.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. I move Amendment 1.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. Please forgive me for having this addition to the resolution, but information came to us recently of this specific consideration, and I believe it's important to include it within the resolution. It's all within the same spirit of what is intended here, and wanted us to be able to consider it in its totality, and therefore I would ask for the adoption of Amendment 1.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Ulibarri.
Thank you, Madam President. This is the first I've seen of L001. If I can request a senatorial 5 to discuss it with my colleagues.
The Senate will be in a senatorial 5.
Thank you, Madam President. I withdraw Amendment 1.
The Senate will come back to order. Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President, and I apologize that there was some additional information necessary for that amendment. The resolution, House Joint Resolution 1013, is meant to point out a situation that we have around the world that we have not, I believe, sufficiently understood by our country. And let me give you just a few examples. Just last fall, I was on a flight from Des Moines, Iowa to Denver, Colorado, and found myself seated beside a gentleman who introduced himself as a pastor from northern India. And in the course of our conversation, he mentioned, oh yes, just north of me, about 1 million Christians have been displaced from their homes. And we did a little bit of research and discovered that hundreds have been killed. And then in Africa, in Nigeria, Boko Haram have been doing the same. And I have information here where 650,000 people have been recently displaced, who were, in this case again, Christians who have been persecuted to the extent of losing their home, and many losing their lives. In the Middle East, we see the same thing happening again and again. I have a report here submitted by the Knights of Columbus and in defense of Christians about some of the atrocities that have been committed in the Middle East. This picture you've probably seen. These people were beheaded, Coptic Christians. And of course, the resolution points out that there have been other religious groups that have experienced other similar atrocities to them too, and none of this should happen. And we can't stop it right here in the Senate, but we should be able to point it out and make it apparent that it is not acceptable. We should not silently stand by and watch as, indeed, there's a quote here on page 3 of the resolution that says, in this, quoting Pope Francis, in this third world war waged piecemeal. It's not just an isolated incident here or there that could be explained because there are billions of people living on this planet. It's much more, it's much deeper, it's much more systemic than that. And for that reason, I do bring before us House Joint Resolution 1013 and ask for its adoption.
Is there any further discussion? He thought he withdrew it. Senator Lundberg, the status of your amendment, Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. I apologize that I spoke quickly on that, but I did withdraw Amendment 1.
Okay.
I do withdraw Amendment 1 again.
All right, any further discussion? Senator Kafalis.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the resolution. I think it is important that as a body we shed light and we condemn unequivocally genocide and crimes against humanity. There's a lot of emphasis on Christian communities which are indeed being persecuted in many parts of the world, but I think we understand that this type of genocide occurs against many different groups of people, including Muslim minorities, which I think is pointed out. So I rise in support, and in particular, I appreciate on page 4, number 6, where there's an acknowledgement of the countries in that part of the world, including the country that I'm from, Greece, that have really gone to extraordinary lengths to help those being persecuted, refugees. It's interesting that as we discuss this resolution, and I thank the sponsor, I believe the Pope Francis, is currently either on the island of Lesbos or Mytilene, as we call it, and he is there to see firsthand what is occurring. Many of you know that I come from the island of Chios, which is about a 2-hour ferry boat ride from Lesbos, and villages that I know very well have been deeply impacted by the flood of refugees that have come across the Aegean Sea. And so I think it's important that we shed light on these atrocities. I think it's important that we condemn these atrocities against all people, because in the end, in the spirit of reconciliation, we are all brothers and sisters. Thank you, colleagues.
Senator Holbert.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of HCR 1013, and I ask that you maybe take a look at page 4, line 20, the Nineveh plain. Almost 3,000 years ago, a man by the name of Jonah was called to Nineveh. And whether or not you want to believe that he was swallowed in the belly of a fish, that's okay. I'll leave that to you. But Jonah was a real man. He actually existed. And he went from Israel, what we know today as Israel, into what we know today as Iraq, to a place called Mosul. That's what we know it today. But the Assyrian capital of Nineveh was there and is there. And for 2,800, 2,900 years, Christians, Jews, Arabs, Muslims found a way to cooperate and live together in Nineveh, in this place called Mosul. And the tomb of Jonah was a place where people of all those faiths came together and found a way to coexist. We see that bumper sticker here, and sometimes that makes me shudder. But the tomb of Jonah was evidence that that actually can happen. And then a few years ago, the group that we know as ISIS, or some people say Daesh now, blew it to dust. They blew that almost 3,000 years of history to dust. And whether you are a believer in the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, I'll leave that to you. But for almost 3,000 years, people in that most divided part of the world found a way to get together and cooperate and live together in peace. And the monument to that effort of human existence was the tomb of Jonah. And it no longer exists.
because one people have put themselves above all others and blew it to dust. And for nothing more, if nothing more than that, I would ask that we all rise in support of House Joint Resolution 1013. And let's coexist here today and cooperate and send a strong voice of support for this resolution. I thank the sponsor for bringing it and ask for an aye vote.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to reflect some of the comments made by my colleague from Fort Collins. We owe a real debt of recognition to countries that have worked with us, worked with the United Nations in providing at least temporary safe havens for refugees in these really regrettable circumstances. From my experience in Jordan, when I first got there in the spring and summer of 1991, there was massive refugee problems coming from Kuwait, from Iraq, people who had settled there since the start of time, recorded history, and yet had to be displaced, sometimes moving on to Egypt, sometimes after fighting was over, returning to their own countries. But in particular, my experience was with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, that has consistently gone out of their way, even when they do not have any international assistance, to do everything they can to protect people, to give them immediate food, clothing, blankets, whatever. Mosul has been a particularly hard-hit place, and some refugees from Mosul told me in particular also the number one refugee agency in that area of the world for a long time was the United States Army, because they would show up and bring in C-130s and helicopters full of blankets, full of clothing, even making airdrops, emergency airdrops into those areas where people had no food, where they were isolated in desert environments, sometimes had no water, and were just trying to walk their way with their families through the deserts, like we've seen so many times throughout history we saw in Europe throughout World War II, of displaced populations. It is a very tough situation. Jordan is a Muslim country primarily, but it has still very strong and vital Orthodox and Catholic populations, as well as a few Protestant populations there in Jordan. A lot of people coming from Palestine. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights, I've met with several of those individuals. I've been inside of Palestinian refugee camps. And unfortunately, some of those get institutionalized for decades and decades and decades with not really much solution. And yet the host countries, especially Jordan, has taken care of those populations, tried to keep the peace, tried to keep quarreling groups from each other. And so we do have allies that will work together on doing this the right way. Unfortunately, they also recognize that there are hostile, malevolent groups that they have to deal with as well. They've suffered from attacks from, as the Senator said, from other Muslim groups, but yet stand upon the rule of law and the rules of morality. And it was a pleasure for me to be able to work with the government of Jordan to try to put a buffer on this, and to keep the calm and keep the peace in those areas whenever we could. And it is to their credit that they take the policies that they do, and I thank them for that ethic that they support. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I rise in support of House Joint Resolution 13 as well, and want to just thank the sponsor for taking the time to work on this. I'm in the unique position to anchor the office just adjacent to that of the Assistant Majority Leader, and I have seen the parade of people that have gone in and out of his office and waited for him. I've seen him work late hours working on this. And it really reminded me, as it came up today, we honor many different things. We know we perform an important function in this building, and one of the things we do is take time like we're doing today to make sure that we pause and are just mindful of certain things, in this case, atrocities that are going on throughout the world. And we do that for other things. Some of those resolutions are coming up, and we will take time appropriately for them this year like we do every year. But this also highlights the importance of being vigilant, constantly vigilant. It's amazing the harm and hurt and pain that man can inflict upon man, even in this day. And you sort of recoil at this. As I was hearing this being read, I thought, surely not. But it is going on. So this is not something in the past. In fact, the very reason why we take time to reflect what's gone on in the past is the hope that this not continue. And unfortunately, we are not there yet. And so we must take time to pause and consider and recoil at what's gone on in the past, and we must take time to do what we're doing today, which is to recoil and say, this really should stop because it continues to go on today. As hard as that is, and so I encourage in the busyness of our schedules that we do what we're doing today is take time to read this and reflect on it and continue to self-examine and say, what can we do? What can we do different? What can we do better to try to halt the harm and pain that mankind inflicts on itself? Maybe the solution is in this building. Maybe it's in other buildings like this scattered across this nation. Maybe it's in our nation's capital. Maybe it rests somewhere beyond our borders. Or maybe some unique combination of all the above. What's important for us is that we take time to do this, we've done that, and that we each be sensitive and willing to look for whatever small part that might be, that whatever part we're supposed to play, a small cog in the wheel, that we may not even recognize today, maybe won't get recognized until we're long gone from this place. But maybe someday somebody in the future will look back and say, what the Colorado Senate did that day, what they took time to do, was a small part in what maybe is a solution that can bring this sort of thing to a halt. Thank you again, Assistant Majority Leader, for taking the time to do this. I applaud your work and support and lend my vote to the passage of House Joint Resolution 13.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to be brief. I think there are three things that we can do in this body that reflect to the issues that we're hearing about on a national and international scope. I believe it's a respect for the sanctity of life, a respect for religious liberty, and also a respect for the proper rule of law. These are the areas that have all broken down internationally in these areas where we see this conflict and where we see people actually losing their lives, their freedom, and their ability to practice their faith. I think it's very important that we focus on those issues here and that we act as a model that hopefully others can look at too, and that we never, ever cease to champion those areas. And we also call on our federal legislators to do the same.
President Cadman.
Thank you, Madam President. I think the concerns brought up in this resolution certainly require our attention, and they require us to share our concern with others, obviously through the distribution of this resolution, but not just there, with the world. This is incumbent upon us to express an outrage that these acts still happen, and I think the majority leader summarized that well. Frankly, when I read the resolution, I was in disbelief that we were talking about this. I was in disbelief that this stuff is still happening. I was in disbelief when I traveled a few years ago with a woman who had survived in Rwanda. I was in disbelief when I met the Holocaust survivors in Auschwitz. And they were in disbelief that what they had lived through was continuing to be repeated across the world. This reminds me of another issue that we're looking at that gave me the same disbelief when I read it, an issue that's coming to a committee near you about something in our own Constitution. We have an exemption to the prohibition on slavery, and I was in disbelief when I read that. And I can't believe we're still talking about that, but it's important that we remember where we came from so that we don't go places that we never should have been. And I think about the comments recently by our distinguished colleague from Denver. I know there's several. It's that guy. Who referenced something that Gandhi said, which is, what happens if we don't do this? What happens if I don't stop? What would happen to that person if I didn't stop? What would happen if we stopped talking about the horrific atrocities of our history and didn't call them out wherever they were and by whoever is doing them, and be a part of solving that problem by expressing our universal outrage for this anywhere and everywhere? Think what we do for our own. Think what we do when a member of our family passes. We leave a marker for their life. We remember them. Think of what happens in Colorado now if we lose a member of our law enforcement community along one of our highways. We leave a marker for them. We remember them. People leave markers for their families. Where are the markers for those people that have been forgotten? Where are the markers for those people that are in graves in places none of us will ever travel? Who is remembering them? I think it's important that we remember them, and it's important that we make sure there are no more of them if we can. And I think it's important that we share that message. I appreciate this resolution and would ask for your support.
Senator Crowder. President.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, I've been listening to this. I didn't want to get fined $5. I've been listening to this, you know, and I had some reservations about what we're talking about. I'll get into that a little bit. You know, the thing about it, my first exposure to genocide basically was Pol Pot in Cambodia. You know, those that have been around long enough, we've lived through these. We've seen what's happened in the Middle East, in Russia, and wherever else. But, you know, what we have is we need to look at where we're at and what we're doing. And, you know, right now what I'm thinking about is we have an open border with Canada. Why don't we have an open border with Mexico? You know, we have a situation where we have some types of genocide in Mexico. What are we doing about that? You know, I've been around where in the 50s and 60s, we had a lot of migrant workers in Colorado, which actually contributed to our economics. In rural Colorado, I don't know about up here. But, you know, we continue to look at this and talk about historical issues that have happened in genocide. But what are we doing to prevent this in the future? You know, I don't think we want to utilize unless absolutely necessary, our military to prevent this. But are we getting to the point where we are isolationist, where we think we can only prevent something happening in the Middle East when our own southern border is so guarded and they're, you know, and I'm not making a judgment on what anybody says, but if people want to build a fence, that's one thing, but the reality is the fence the answer. Is the answer of economics of Mexico. You know, I've always believed that when the economics of Mexico improve, we have more people exiting this country going back. So there's a philosophy that we tend to look at abroad, but yet our own border we pass. So I wonder, you know, what we should be directing to and what we should be adhering to. But when we're talking about building fences, when we should be building relationships that were built and have deteriorated. And I understand the situations, the ramifications, but you know, it's a situation where maybe it's time to start looking at things for reality and making those changes that are necessary to build those relationships, to build, you know, coalitions to attempt to stop this. You know, you can take historically the one I mentioned about Pol Pot. You know, how could it have been prevented? You know, that's hindsight, but we should be looking to the future how to prevent this from ever happening again. But I always wonder about the border issue, the north border and the south issue, and why they're not the same. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. Just briefly as a recap here, I bring this before, and I'm very honored to be allowed to be the Senate sponsor. It was Representative Winholtz and Representative Rosenthal who brought this in the House. This is, you know, every year we look at some of the horrific genocides that have occurred in the past, the Holocaust. Last year we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and indeed there's even a marker outside of the Capitol permanently reminding us of that. And far too often what I hear us say is, well, never again, this should never happen again. But as I look around the world, it is happening again and again and again and again and again. And the sinful nature of man will always yield wars and conflict, and people will die and families will be displaced. But when it happens because of their faith, it is particularly wrong. And we shouldn't go silent and just ignore it because it's outside of the borders of our comfortable state, or usually outside of the borders of our comfortable state. And so I thank you for the time we've spent here this morning, but I pray that this will be a call to be aware of these issues always. And as we go from this body to, you know, some here may find themselves in other areas of authority and responsibility within government service, never forget what is happening far too often. We don't have time to cover it all. If anybody wants a copy of this rather extensive report of the genocide against Christians in the Middle East, I'm told that can be made available to you. And Madam Chair, President, just go Madam President, look around, figure out who's who. There are some who spend a great deal of their time making people aware of that. We have three people here today. One is Father Joe, a Maronite Catholic priest from St. Peter's and Paul in Simi Valley, and another one, gentleman, Father Andre Mahanan, who is pastor of St. Rafka Maronite Catholic Church here in Denver and the founder and director of the Mission of Hope and Mercy for Christians in the Middle East. And he's the gentleman that, if you want, I can get this report to you. And also Beth Folsom, who is the director of Stand for Faith, which is a new organization bringing to light the refugee issues in the Middle East. And I bring this to our attention because that organization was actually started by a former colleague of ours, Senator Tom Weems. There are many who spend a great deal of time looking into this. I thank you that we can spend a little bit of time right now, and may we never forget what happens far too often around our world. I ask for the adoption of House Joint Resolution 1013. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Joint Resolution 1013. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Joint Resolution 1013 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that the morning roll call be used as co-sponsors to House Joint Resolution 1013.
Is there objection? There is objection, co-sponsors. Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Kafalis, Senator John, Senator Johnston, Senator Lambert, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Mr. Majority Leader, Senator Carroll, Senator Hodge, Senator Heath, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Roberts, Senator Grantham, Senator Aguilar, Senator Garcia, Senator Todd, Senator Marble, Senator Neville, Senator Woods, Minority Leader Guzman, Senator Merrifield, Senator Kerr, Senator Crowder, Senator Cook, Senator Tate, Senator Donovan, Senator Holbert, Senator Hill, please add the President. Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate proceed out of order for the purpose of taking up consideration of conference committee reports.
You have heard the motion that the Senate proceed out of order. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will proceed out of order for consideration of conference committee reports. Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate lay over House Bill 1165 to the end of the consideration of conference committee reports calendar.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1165, consideration of conference committee report, will lay over to the end of the conference committee reports calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to House Bill 1405?
House Bill 1405 by Representative Hamner, Senator Lambert, concerning the provision and payment of the expenses of the executive and legislative judicial departments of the state of Colorado and of its agencies and institutions for and during the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2016, except as otherwise noted.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your conference committee is met, and we move that the Senate adopt the first report of the first conference committee on House Bill 1405.
Is there further discussion? Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I would encourage an aye vote on the conference committee report, just as I would encourage your yes vote on the actual bill, the state budget for fiscal year 16-17. You will recall the bill left this chamber on a very strong bipartisan vote of 30-5, and it returns with just a few small changes as a result of the conference committee. There are a couple Senate amendments that did not survive the conference committee process, but happily, I would want to make sure you are aware that the additional funding that the Senate added to the bill to support the work of the Department of Revenue in processing income tax and tax credit requests, that has been included in the report. The additional funding that the Senate added in the Department of Public Health and Environment for suicide prevention programs, that has been included in the conference committee report. The conference committee report is a little lengthy because about 3 or 4 pages of that report are purely technical amendments correcting small errors and numbers that ended up transposed or put in the wrong column, as our JBC staff works so hard to help make sure that our $27 billion budget bill has all of the numbers in the right columns and all of the numbers, all the math sums correctly, and our budget remains in balance. And so the bulk of your conference committee report is technical amendments that I hope no one will ask any questions about this morning. 2 issues are worthy of our discussion here this morning as we consider the conference committee report. And I want to start with the Air Pollution Control Division at the Department of Public Health and Environment. As you'll recall, this has been sort of one of the sore spots or the sore thumbs in the budget since the Budget Committee introduced the bill just a few weeks ago. This body made a cut to the Air Pollution Control Division that would have resulted in the reduction of 2.4 FTE and about $330,000 worth of funding that is paid by industry permits from cash fund sources, I might add. The conference committee report strikes a compromise, and I want to say that word a few times. We compromised. And we compromised in such a way that there is a reduction to the personal services line in the Air Pollution Control Division for reasons that I will not go into, but I will make sure the body is aware that this reduction results in no decrease in the staffing levels at the Air Pollution Control Division. No one will be laid off because of the reduction that is being made. I find this an acceptable compromise to a perplexing controversy. And so I want to just encourage you to be comfortable with this aspect of the conference committee report, because compromise, colleagues, is the nature of the work that we do. It is the nature of our budgeting process. It's actually one of the hallmarks of why our budget committee has so successfully, over some challenging obstacles this year, brought to you a balanced budget that doesn't contain all of the budget cuts that we have been talking about for most of the year, a budget that I think will serve our state well for the fiscal year 16-17. Compromise, colleagues, is not a dirty word. It's the nature of how we do our work in this building. Now, I want to also address a new issue that has come up recently that you've all been aware of. We had a caucus discussion of this yesterday. There's an article in the newspaper today that explains the need to strike some compromises within our Department of Corrections budget. We had reserved money for a couple things. It was money that was savings that resulted when the Budget Committee, during our figure setting process, chose to use the lower of 2 available forecasts of what our prison populations will be in the next fiscal year. We every year get a forecast from the Legislative Council staff and also from the executive branch from the Division of Criminal Justice at the Department of Public Safety. And we choose, just like we choose between the overall revenue forecasts of the executive and legislative branch, we, in our figure setting, make choices about which prison population forecast to use, and we chose to use the lower forecast this year, which is a little different from tradition for the committee. We have generally used the higher forecast, assuming that would be the more prudent, more conservative approach to budgeting, anticipating a greater caseload in our prison system. But this year we chose to go with the lower forecast, and we did that for a couple reasons. One, if you'll recall, during supplementals back in February, we took a pretty significant negative supplemental from the Department of Corrections because the caseload, the population in our prisons just wasn't what it was projected to be. And so we felt we were on pretty safe ground taking the lower of the two forecasts, but it meant a reduction of about $5.7 million from the DOC budget. Because there's some risk to the fact we went with the lower forecast, we set aside that money. And we set aside that money, one, to buffer any forecast error on the populations, and two, because it would provide us access to some funds for some other things that are afoot in the Department of Corrections. We have been struggling with prison utilization, and as you know, over my time on the Budget Committee, we've closed 2 prisons. We have struggled mightily with each of those decisions, and we actually, colleagues, could be at a crossroads soon where we struggle again with a decision about closing a prison facility. And we know that if the caseload numbers continue to go down, that will probably happen. There is also a plan that has been presented through a study that was commissioned, a prison utilization study, on how we might realign the uses of our prison facility to be more efficient and get better use out of the space. And in particular, to get better use out of the space at the Centennial South facility, which many of you know by the acronym CSP2, a facility that costs taxpayers about $20 million a year in debt service for it to sit empty and not be utilized in Canyon City. We pay $20 million a year for an empty prison we don't use. There is a plan to change that, and it would require quite a bit of realignment of prison facility utilization. It's not something we can do overnight. It's something that this General Assembly in future sessions is going to have to provide funding for and planning for, and it's one of the things that you'll inherit and the next Joint Budget Committee will inherit. Those changes are probably all coming, and yet in the meantime, we have 20-some thousand prisoners in our DOC system that we are responsible for housing. And the private prison in Kit Carson County in Burlington, Colorado, is one of the places we house those people. And that facility is at a point where the vendor, the contractor that operates the facility, is saying they are considering closing the facility because they cannot make a go of it with as few prisoners as we have there, and the fact that 3 other states that used to house their prisoners out of state by contracting here with the facility in Colorado have all, in just the past couple months, removed their prisoners from that population. That facility is struggling. It could easily be closed, and yet we're not sure that's the right thing to happen at this juncture, and we're certainly aware of the fact that it's not something we can close overnight, that we can close without a plan. And at this point, we don't have a plan. And so in your conference committee report, there is an additional appropriation that we have not discussed as a body yet of $3 million to the Department of Corrections for the purpose of negotiating an addendum to their current contract with that contractor that operates the facility to maintain that capacity and those prison beds to maintain their availability to our correction system. This is one of those situations where you may not like the situation you're in, and yet necessity demands that you provide a solution. We have the prisoners. They've been committed to the Department of Corrections. We need facilities and beds for them to be housed in. And we contract for some of those services in that state. And sometimes that's advantageous, and sometimes it's not. And perhaps this is one of those times when we're over a little bit of a barrel here in our bargaining situation, and yet we know We can't let this facility close overnight. We know that we have a number of prisoners who are housed there now, and we know that our prison population projections, both from the executive and from the legislative forecasts, tell us that in 17, 18, and years after, we expect our prison population to continue to increase. And so that capacity that those private facilities provide is part of how our system operates today. It provides a certain amount of elasticity and flexibility to us as populations and forecasts change. We probably need to keep that capacity online, and that's what you'll be voting on with this conference committee report. I know that this is late to the party. It's something that probably deserved more conversation in this body than it received, but I can assure you that a great deal of conversation on this topic has gone on the first floor of this building and at the Department of Corrections, the people in the executive branch that are responsible for maintaining these facilities and housing these prisoners. This is something they've been aware of for several weeks and have been talking about, and I regret the fact that it's coming to you so late and so unanticipated, and yet I would ask for you, in the spirit of compromise, to vote yes on the conference committee report and provide this appropriation so that the executive branch can find agreement with the vendor on what it's going to take to keep that facility open and provide that additional capacity to our system. That's the situation we're in. That's the yes vote I would encourage you to cast. And I just want to let you know that this is yet another example of where compromise has occurred in our budgeting process. Thank you for your attention, colleagues.
Senator Newell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I just wanted to thank the Joint Budget Committee members in both chambers for keeping in the amendment for $100,000 for suicide prevention efforts in the state. And I wholeheartedly thank you for that particular compromise, since it is such a pressing issue. I just wanted to publicly thank you all.
Is there further discussion? Senator Johnston? Senator Johnston?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to rise on this topic that was just raised and give a little bit of perspective on this. I do thank the members of the Joint Budget Committee. I think they've done tremendous work here, and I think I respect their call for the spirit of compromise. I do think there is something unfortunate and perhaps alarming in the last 24 hours of this negotiation, and that is around this question of the private prison funding. Now, just a small bit of facts, which I think folks may know, which is just 3 years ago, this body voted for a $12 million increase to this same industry for the same private prison support because they needed the same insurance of a stable amount of revenue for them to be able to do business. And we supported that. And we voted for that. And after that $12 million increase, 4 years later, we have seen only a 10% decline in their total enrollment. So they have a contracted daily bed rate of $56 a day, just like every other service in this state has a contracted rate. Schools have a PPR rate, Medicaid has a reimbursement rate, providers have a reimbursement rate, and we set that in contract and we keep that. And now, 3 years later, they have come to us, and because they have a 10% decline and because they lost some other contracts in other states, they want us to put $3 million into renegotiating that rate. Now, I come down because I supported that compromise 3 years ago, and I support, maybe unlike some of the folks on my side, I support the idea of public-private partnerships. But I support the idea of public-private partnerships because they are meant to do those three things. They are meant to bring the efficiency and effectiveness of private industry with the public-mindedness and the public spirit and the public service that the public sector brings, and they're meant to do it in a partnership to deliver something for the public good. That's how this is supposed to be structured. Let me tell you what the examples are of how those things work effectively. Over the last 5 years, when we have seen a 10% decline in enrollment due to out-of-state contracts that necessitates this $3 million demand today, let's talk about some of what the rest of the state has faced. Also, small rural communities that are the major job centers in those neighborhoods, in those districts, in those towns. Right? Take Vilas, take Carville School District. Those districts have seen 50% declines in total revenue in 4 years. 50% declines. Did they come down to the state capitol and hold the gun to our head and say, if you don't give us not just back the 50% we've lost, but an additional 25% increase, we're going to shut down all these public schools. We're going to shut them down, put all these employees on the street, put the kids on the street. No, that didn't happen. Did the primary care providers, who we made 23%, 20% cuts to their reimbursement rates, come down and say, you know what, we're going to stop seeing any patients. We're going to refuse to see Medicaid patients anymore. We're going to walk away unless you give us a 25% increase. Who has seen a 25% increase in this budget in the last 3 years? We were delighted for K-12 to get held harmless at 0, which I might remind you, a 0 apart from the actual systemic 25% budget cut called the negative factor, which has gone nowhere, which is almost $1 billion. Did the schools of the state of Colorado come down and say, you know what, you owe us 25% cuts on that negative factor, so we're going to shut all 178 school districts unless you give us that $1 billion? No, they didn't. You know why? Because they actually understand the nature of a public-private partnership, which is you do it for the total good of all of the bodies involved. This is actually the worst of all of what you get out of a public-private partnership. Because, you know, in private business, our family has a private business, when you lose revenue, you lose revenue. You either find new revenue, you either cut employees, or you go out of business. In public enterprises, like these school districts across the state that have seen 30, 50% cuts, what public entities do when you get losses of revenue is you make it work. That kindergarten teacher says, that's okay, I'll take 3 more kindergarten kids in my class. That teacher says, no problem, I'll cover the after-school program without compensation. So in private industries, you face the cuts. In public industries, you make it work. And somehow, these folks got the best of both deals. They're not going to be exposed to the market forces a private entity would face, and they're not going to be forced to tighten their belts the way a public industry would face. Instead, they get assurances of guaranteed number of inmates at guaranteed rates of increases. While our school districts have asked for that, our primary care providers have asked for that, our psych facilities that have seen 50% drops in enrollment have asked for that, and we've given them none of it. That, to me, is not the way to run a railroad, and it's certainly not the way to run a public-private partnership. It's not in the best interest of the state of Colorado, and it's not in the best interest of the rest of the values that we hold in this budget. Now, the difficulty of the nature of blackmail is they have something that you want. And that's why it works. And so I have taken a long look at the $27 billion that you all negotiated in this budget, and I commend the Joint Budget Committee for tremendous work. And I think they are in a similarly difficult spot in the 11th hour to have to face this negotiation. So I will vote yes for this budget. I will vote yes for this budget because all of the rest of the values that this state carries that you all have found a way in a bipartisan, pragmatic partnership to solve. But I will also vote yes with 2 additions. One is your yes vote on this bill should come with a thank you to every single school district and every single primary care provider and every single real public partner who said, I will find a way to take that cut and I will find a way to make it work. And to not come down to this chamber and this building and hold you hostage for more money. It should come with that thank you. And the second is it should come with a caution. That is, if this is the way that someone gets what they want out of the state budget process, is to threaten to kill a small community or cut their jobs, and they get a $3 million ransom out of it, be careful what will come back next year. Because if this is the message we send, all of the primary care providers and the K-12 providers and the psych hospitals should have learned from this was, if you really want to get your funding, you shouldn't be a team player. You shouldn't be a true partner. You should instead exact as much as you can out of communities that have very little to give and hope that we'll bend. I'll vote yes on the budget because there's a lot in here that is a true partnership. This one is not.
Senator Lambert?
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, some of the information that you were just provided is not totally accurate. We did, a couple years ago, provide about $9 million to keep these facilities open, but there was no blackmail. This was discussed directly with the Governor's Office of State Planning and Budgeting, and the reason we held this over was to thoroughly study the entire prison system for the prison utilization study. It was a mutual agreement between the legislature and the executive branch at that time because of other bad decisions that were made. There was a decision to close the Fort Lyon prison. As you recall, some people have characterized that, including the governor's staff, as probably the worst problem that the state has had to deal with in the last, well, ever since the governor's been the governor. It is a big problem. It was done without much advanced study, and it was decided a couple of years ago, we basically need to freeze the status quo for a year to finish that prison utilization study. We now have that study, and we have a new variant of that study that was delivered just a couple months ago, specifically directed, as the senator said, the senator from Denver said, directed toward the problem of a vacant prison in Centennial South. That study is very transparent. You can get a copy of it. And I'll say right now, the tier of the most likely prisons to be closed, if we do need to reduce the capacity of our overall prison system, 3 particular facilities are listed as the most likely to close, or the ones that should be considered. Kit Carson is one, and it's in not any particular order, but Kit Carson, the Cheyenne Mountain Reentry Facility in Colorado Springs, and the prison in Rifle, Colorado. Those have been discussed in previous administrations. The Rifle prison had been discussed as the primary prison to close and actually been offered up in some budget requests. We have not done that. We have not closed Rifle. We've not closed Cheyenne Mountain. We've not closed Kit Carson. This is a very deliberate process. What we did do is close Fort Lyon, and that caused a lot of problems, both in economic development for that region in Bent County, one that is extremely depressed and has virtually, like Kit Carson and Burlington, a very, very high reliance upon agriculture. The Kit Carson facility is basically the only non-agricultural facility in that area or industry in that area that's not directly connected to agriculture. And as you know, agriculture goes up and down with the amount of rainfall we have and the amount of sunshine that we have and the growing seasons and the cold in the winter. It's unpredictable as to how those communities are going to either thrive and prosper or be under such pressure that they economically fail as a region. So this is something that needs deliberation. And to be completely accurate, I know I and my colleagues on the Joint Budget Committee, all 6 of us, do not believe that it's appropriate to be involved in a contract negotiation. And this is not. We were requested by the governor's office to consider setting aside money that we'd already set aside. And actually, this is an appropriation of a $5.7 million set aside used for another purpose, as the senator from Denver mentioned. We did not take this out of the DOC budget. Usually, we would have spent it already by this time. Because of that forecast, we did not spend it. We simply set it aside. And on page 7 of your long bill narrative, the red book, which I can't hold up because I don't have it with me, but I've held it up several times, on page 7 you can see there is a specific set aside for a purpose. That's 5.688, I think it is, about $5.7 million that we did not appropriate as part of the long bill. But we set it aside to manage the risk that is inherent in a fluctuating prison population. Natalie Mullis, any of our analysts will say, when they do an analysis of a forecast population, whether it's the population of the state, population of schools, everything else, all of our analysts will tell you our analysis is wrong. It's not going to be accurate 6 months from now. We cannot tell you to a student or to an offender or anything else, we cannot tell you exactly what that population is going to be. So the Joint Budget Committee, I think wisely, took the lower of those two forecasts, but we didn't spend the money on something else because within the DOC system, they are going to need some money to implement a modernization plan that is currently wasting $20 million a year. We need to move forward with that. The department's not fully ready to do that yet. They can't implement this overnight. So we reserve that money and set it aside, but we are not negotiating a contract here. We appropriated $3 million, and you can say page 2 of the committee report, appropriated out of a non-appropriated set-aside, appropriated $3 million for external capacity sustainability. That is not a contract. It is not the position, it's not the mission of either our budget committee or the state legislature to make contracts. That is not what this budget does. What we do, and this is exceptional because this is something that came up since the 3rd of November when the governor and the DOC made their request a long time ago. We didn't know about this. But the governor's office came to us and said, we need some flexibility to manage our system with the understanding that if we, and one of the options is let's pull off the Band-Aid. Okay, let's not have a deliberate plan into the future. Let's just pull this off, close that prison, reconsolidate it at Benton Crowley. We can do that. But we don't know what the effects of that are. Because just as our analyses, our forecasts of prison populations are low right now, the same forecasts say that over the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to go back up. If we don't have the external capacity that the governor's office has asked for, then we have a new risk. Then we look at opening up other facilities at a higher cost that we don't know about yet. We can't anticipate this with 100% certainty. But we're looking at, what's the risk of another purchase, a new facility or something like that, or reopening a facility that has been closed, which could be a much higher cost. But if I could characterize what we've heard from the governor's office is we need to wait a little while. We need to find out what the impact is going to be on the city of Burlington. As part of this understanding with having a prison facility there, the city of Burlington gets 25 cents per day per offender that's housed in that facility because they provide the infrastructure, the water, the electricity, and everything else to manage a large institution in that area. We also have to be concerned about the tax base, that in the middle of the year, we'd pull off the Band-Aid, and under the contract, they could do this now. That's the contract that they have. They can repurpose this, move their employees, they can move the offenders that they house to 2 other facilities and give the state 60 days notice that we're leaving. But what's the effect of that in the short term with no planning? That means 60 days from now, families could be moved, students could be moved, the tax base of that city could fall disastrously to the extent where they cannot provide taxes for their own public school system. This is not a zero-sum game because they now provide the taxes to be pretty sustainable in their own school district. Without this private prison, without the tax base, without that employee base, that school system will lose money, and somebody's going to be paying for it, and it's going to be us. In the middle of the year, we're going to be changing this, and I don't think it's probably going to be a $3 million impact. It may be somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, but this is going to have an immediate impact on people's lives that has not been planned. It was not part of the governor or the department's request back in November. And unfortunately, we're in a situation right now because of this lowering prison population where somebody has to make a decision as to how to mitigate this over time. So I just want you to understand there are a lot of moving parts in here, and I'm not convinced necessarily that just pulling off the Band-Aid and just making this happen right now isn't the right decision. It may be the right decision. That's because I'm really not compassionate and I really don't care about the people of the city of Burlington. I don't care where they go. I don't care where those students go because I'm just compassionate somehow. But fortunately, other members of my committee are probably more compassionate than I am, actually think through these things and think, well, there might be actually people involved with this. And I say, well, yeah, but it's going to happen anyway. It may happen next year. This may be the time to make a decision to start closing some of our facilities because, folks, we've got about, I would guess, wild guess, probably 6,000 vacant beds in all the prisons combined in Colorado. About 6,000, 5,500 to 6,000. They're not being used, and most of those are mothballed. The question is, do we mothball another facility, sell it, whatever happens to it, but we have way, way more capacity than what we need. But making decisions for that, in my opinion, just as a planner, needs to be deliberate. We need to understand what the ramifications of that are, and that's why I'm willing to support what we did in the budget. I just want you to understand the kinds of discussions that we've had on this. And the public policy of this is not something that the Budget Committee is trying to force down anybody's throats. It's not a decision that we're trying to force down the throats of the city of Burlington, because we need to have more deliberation over what the consequences are. Unfortunately, we have less than a month to go now, but about a month after seeing the DA, the decision could be made when we're not here. We'll have no control over it. And the question is, do we allow the governor's office, not to force them into some sort of contract deal, but allow them at least enough latitude to discuss this and make a decision whether it's worth extending this contract under the current conditions or under slightly different conditions for another year so that this decision can be more deliberate, more planning can be done with this, and it's not just a company that's involved with here, it's an entire city, colleagues. It's the students of an entire city. It's the economy of an entire city, maybe an entire region, because people come from outside the city of Burlington to buy their groceries, to send their children to school, to work at the prison, to work in agriculture. But this is a major contributor to the overall economy of that city. Is this a compromise? You bet it is. I've been pushing for years to close what I think are unnecessary facilities in our prisons, or at least realign them so we're not spending $20 million a year for a facility we don't ever use. We have major work to do in this area, and we need major leadership to make some of these decisions. But in this particular case, the issue before us is, do we stretch this out? Do we give at least the governor the latitude over the next couple months to study this, to understand the economic impact on the people of this area, those that are not even involved with this private prison? Or do we make the hard decision to, pull off the Band-Aid, do it all at one time, sort of like we did at Fort Lyon, and then have a new series of questions? Well, how do we support the schools? How do we support the economy of that region? Because what we've been doing is going to go away. And it may have to. Eventually, it may have to. So as we deliberate on this, as we decide this question, I don't think this is a partisan question. I think we have as many people on my side of the aisle as Senator from Denver has on your side of the aisle that are split on this issue. It's not a Republican-Democrat issue. It's a question of timing. It's a question of, do we deliberate about this, or because of maybe an emotional, we have a lot of people that support private prisons. We have a lot of people who oppose private prisons. I would just submit, colleagues, that that is not the issue today. The issue today is, if we're going to make a decision on this, do we have to make it at this time, on this particular vote, or do we do this in a deliberate planning process, buy some time for the executive branch to actually be able to engage on this decision with the cities of the Eastern Plains, as well as the corporations involved, as well as our own state employees that are involved in the correction system, because this is an interrelated organism. And all we've been asked to do was to basically appropriate $3 million so DOC can decide, and the governor's office can decide how to proceed on this. Without the $3 million, you're right. The decision is basically made, or they can use money from someplace else, probably in the DOC budget, if they can scrape that together, and then we can come back and do a supplemental later. That's a possibility, perhaps. But this was a compromise. The initial ask from the governor's office was $5.7 million, the entire amount of the set-aside. We've compromised down to about $3 million to give them some wiggle room to at least negotiate in good faith without even knowing what the outcome is right now. But that's what we've been asked. Could you appropriate part of this money that we've set aside for modernization plans and things like that, for risk management? Could we use part of this to address this serious policy question through the governor's office? It's his request. It's not the Budget Committee's request. But I believe, colleagues, that is the issue we're deciding today. It's not an issue of private prisons in general, public prisons in general. This is an issue of how do we go about, as a deliberative body, to approach a deliberative question. So I would ask you to support the committee report for that reason. If you do support a policy of, as I say, pulling off the Band-Aid, let's make this happen, and I think I've got some colleagues that are saying it's inevitable anyway, we got to go ahead and do this anyway. They may not like this either. But what the governor is asking us to do is to be deliberative about this, give him the spending authority to at least proceed into some discussions of planning what the end game is going to be. So I'd ask for an aye vote on the conference committee report.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator from El Paso County. You actually answered a number of the questions I had written down about this, so I appreciate your explanation. And I would like to start by saying I actually care a lot about what happens to our rural areas. I care a lot about what happens to Burlington. I had the pleasure last fall of pedaling the plains and seeing a lot of the east side of our state and watching former Senator Brophy zoom by me as I slowly pedaled down the road. I think I got to see about 4 times the scenery he did based on speed alone. And I do think that, that it's important that we as a state help to support our rural areas and that we use some of our tax revenue to do that. And so I want to start by saying that. I also want to say that unlike, I actually have not been on judiciary long enough to have an opinion. I don't like or dislike private prisons. I, of course, dislike that we have a society in which so much criminal behavior happens and the issue of whether somebody needs to go to prison or not is raised. But I've not studied the issue enough to know what are the pluses or minuses of different ways of helping. I think what I hope our goal is with, even with prisons and helping people come back and someday become productive members of our society. So I just wanted to preface with those 2 comments. I rise actually in opposition to the conference committee report, and it's for a couple of reasons. The first is that what I've heard, and I've not been at the conference committee, and I don't get to speak to the governor on a private basis, is that we're going to allocate $3 million now, but they might need more, and they would come back during the interim and ask for more. And I guess, to me, I disagree. I think there is time in the next 4 weeks for us to deliberate this policy. I think what I heard from the senator from El Paso is that our current contract, they could not abandon the prison without 60 days notice. And so maybe as we deliberate the policy, we deliberate that, okay, we're going to allocate $3 million more, but we want a new contract where we need 1 year's notice. I think there is room here to make this win-win for the private part of the partnership and us, the public part. I feel like if we just let this conference committee report pass, let the private industry know we're going to give them this money, we know we might have to give them more over the next 8 months, and not actually determine a policy that says we as a General Assembly have determined that we want to support the city of Burlington, we want to keep this industry going until we can help them transition to another industry. And to do that, we are going to allocate our tax funds to that purpose. But in exchange for that, we're going to renegotiate our contract with the prisons so that they give us a whole 1 year notice or whatever it is we need. We're going to be clear about what the limit is on what we spend with that. And then I would be fine with this policy. But to have it just come up like this, and I guess it's sort of suspicious to me that it's in 24 hours and they happen to ask for the exact amount that's on the line item that was set aside back in November. that there wasn't more notice and that we couldn't have been discussing this the entire session instead of being asked today with less than 4 weeks in session to make this significant policy decision with absolutely no assurances that we're not going to, in 60 days, be at a point where they're going to once again say, in 60 days, we're closing this facility unless you give us another $3 million, or unless you give us another $3 million. And so I dispute that there is not time to have this discussion and to sit down and look at our priorities in a rational manner. And perhaps I'm in the minority, but I guess if as a legislator I had to stand back and look at the entire state of Colorado, and I want to look primarily at the rural areas and say, is it more important that we put this $3 million to support this private prison industry in Burlington, or is it more important as a state that we do something to help our rural areas that have no money to pay for ambulances, or to perhaps provide beds for those people we know we're putting into law enforcement facilities with mental health issues? You know, I think I'd like to have that discussion. And by agreeing to this conference committee report, we close the discussion. Now, there are other bills coming through that will affect spending, and we do need to sit down and prioritize what we think should be prioritized. And so I don't think we should spend this $3 million in other places. It can just be left there in the budget. But I think we should consciously, as a legislature, vote on, is this how we want to spend this $3 million, and have it come forward as a policy, and make sure that if our governor negotiates this, he's negotiating as well that they're not going to leave us in 60 days, that they have to give us at least a year's notice, and that we have set up in there some process for determining what are we going to do about the 6,000 empty beds, because certainly we don't want to be passing more laws to fill them. So I would ask for your no vote on the conference committee report.
Senator Merrifield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Right off the bat, I want to thank the JBC for an extremely difficult job that they have done, I think, yeoman's work with. However, I do have a concern that's been recently brought up, and that's my major concern. It's been really, really recently brought up. And unlike a couple of my colleagues who've spoken at the microphone already, I will just put it right out there. I'm not a fan of private prisons. I don't like private prisons. I think any industry that profits from warehousing humans and at almost slave labor wages is unconscionable. But the fact of the matter is, this is my 10th budget, and I can't recall, I could be wrong, a more last-minute issue being brought forward. And I agree with my colleague from Colorado Springs, we need more deliberation. He used the word deliberation frequently, and that's the problem here. We have not had deliberation, and the process that we're going through now, I think, is flawed to make this decision. What this asks us to do is to prop up a failing, inefficient business that certainly flies in the face of those of you who are very, very strong proponents of a free market. And in addition, we're talking about an industry in a county that wished to secede from Colorado. And we're talking about a business, this particular prison, that has a record of 60-1 complaints that we received in comparison to all the other prisons in the state, and where 50% of the employees come from out of state, not from within the community, and a prison that has not had a doctor that goes for 3 to 4 months at a time without a doctor or a dentist on the premises, and that the administration has twice falsified documents that they've sent to the Senate to explain situations within the prison. So for those of us who were very passionate about other issues on the budget that we really wanted to see funded, and that we then, thinking we had realized that there was no options, and shrugging our shoulders and swallowed hard, we're willing to support the amendment as it was presented to us a few days ago. We find this very hard, I think, to support now that this this particular issue's been sprung on us. And frankly, I will not know how I'm voted until my name is called.
Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'll get to the point. I oppose the conference committee report because I oppose an 11th hour, $3 million bailout to a for-profit private prison. I object to the process. This was not in the House version of the budget, where it could have been debated and considered in the context of all of our competing budget choices. This was not in the Senate version, where it could have been considered and debated in the context of our other competing budget choices. I object to an 11th hour, $3 million bailout for one particular for-profit private prison. If we had $3 million outside of the judicial process to add for 11th hour help, I think we need a very serious and considered conversation of, do we prefer a $3 million bailout for a for-profit private prison, or would we rather invest that in rural schools? $3 million bailout for a private prison, or would we rather invest that $3 million in rural economic development? $3 million bailout for a private prison, or would we rather use that to fund the mental health holds we heard of people who are being taken under the auspices of requiring mental health care, yet we are not financially in the position to timely deliver it? $3 million bailout for a private prison, or something towards higher ed that we know is shortchanged this year, that will be forcing tuition for everyday students and families to go up. In the context of an $831 million remaining negative factor for underfunding K-12 schools, in the context of looming tuition increases for higher ed, in the context of wait lists for disability services for Colorado families, I can't say that this $3 million is my priority. I will be a no on this conference committee report, but a yes on the budget. I will add my voice to those who thank the members of the Joint Budget Committee for your work on the budget and even on the conference committee report itself. But my objection is both to the process and the policy. I object to the fact that we are being told now that we need a considered approach to this. Guess what? This was foreseeable. This was foreseeable 12 months ago. This has been foreseeable for years. The fact that we're just now adding it in a part of the process that wasn't seen or considered in the House or Senate, bluntly to me, is a failure to plan. And we shouldn't reward those who fail to plan. This isn't a last-minute surprise. We've known what the rates are. We've known what the inmate population is. We've known every fact that we know before now. So to me, it was foreseeable. And the right response here is to plan for what we're going to do with this community and what we ultimately want to do to make the whole system work. But I don't want a $3 million bailout to reward a failure to plan. This sets a dangerous precedent that skips every part that is deliberative and transparent in the budget process. And I would just add to the point that I find it particularly interesting that we would be doing a $3 million bailout when, for the most part, I hear down here so much about the free market. And it's about the free market until it's not. And now we're talking about a taxpayer-subsidized bailout of one particular entity and location, where essentially we have seen a failure to plan. And on the policy, it is a zero-sum game. In a balanced budget state, every dollar we spend in one location is by definition not going elsewhere. For those reasons, I will be a no on this conference committee report, but will be a yes on the bigger work of the budget on readoption. And thank you for your time and attention.
Senator Grantham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for the comments and the robust debate on this issue. I know there's some passionate feelings in regard to this industry. I think there's some unfortunate things being thrown out there. Words like blackmail, even bailout. The term just used was a failed to plan. And I guess if we don't do this, then I guess the answer to that is to further fail to plan. This is about a capacity issue that we have in DOC. We are presented with a problem right here and right now, and we have an option to do A or B. And if we are given, taking away this from the conference committee report, if that were the case, we would be left with an option, the option. I'm not sure that is a great way to plan either. The money, it's been suggested at this mic that we're taking away from here, we're taking away from here, we're taking away from here. I think the two senators from the JBC who spoke prior on this said it very well already, that this comes from the forecast that we chose, the buffer that existed when we chose that lower forecast, and the set-aside that was created because of that forecast to plan for contingencies. And here we are. Here's a contingency, and we have to deal with it. Sometimes these contingencies happen in the summer or the fall, and the JBC has to deal with them just the 6th of the JBC. But here we have the opportunity to debate this and talk about this, but this is hardly a failure to plan. This is hardly, as it's been construed, blackmail and a bailout. We are dealing with this because we're looking at a problem with long-term capacity and the forecasts as they may continue to rise, and we need that buffer, whether it's a private prison or a public prison. The Vice Chair of the JBC mentioned from here that we look back at the prison utilization study, and this facility is on the top tier of those that may close, in addition to 2 others. This still gives us that time to further examine that and to see if that is a potential possibility. But right now, with what we see as far as the increase in the forecast of population from our current standing, this location is needed. What would be the cost to us as a state if we lost this capacity and then we did have rising inmate populations to reopen a facility? What is the ramp-up cost for these facilities? Other things have been suggested as far as the economic viability and the looking at Burlington and Kit Carson and comparing it to some of these other facilities that have closed down. I've been part of those discussions directly. I happened to be the senator of Benton County at the time when Fort Lyon closed down. That was not fun. Those are tough times when those things happen. Even in Canyon City, when we had facilities closed down, maybe the thought is that we can absorb it better down there. But you know what, folks? It still hurts. And to just summarily close this facility, and as the senator from Colorado Springs, the vice chair of JBC, said earlier, just ripping the Band-Aid off, is that planning or is that failing to plan? And I would say that would be failing to plan. This gives us the time we need to properly take care of this business and to properly ascertain the populations in DOC and the need and the necessity for the capacity that gives us. And I would ask for a yes vote.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to be brief, but I wanted to actually echo some of the comments that were made by the senator from Aurora. We do need to plan better. But we have been planning. Now we need to execute a plan. Pardon me. If we do nothing, I wanted to make this clear, if we do nothing to add this $3 million to the contract, if we have the contract as it is right now, it would not increase the budget. It would not provide any more money to the contractor. It's the existing contract. And under the existing contract, because the provider operates 3 facilities, they can make the decision under the current contract to reconsolidate those facilities at the same rates. There is no increase in rates. In good faith, that's what the state of Colorado has done under this contract. We don't pay for the prison. We pay a per diem rate for each offender that we put into their system, and how they manage that under that contract gives them the latitude to put those offenders where they need to. But because of this overall decline in population, that's the decision they can make right now, is to consolidate from 3 facilities into 2 facilities. It would not cost the state a penny more, as I understand the contract. But that has an unintended consequence for the state that the governor is concerned about, because they could do it within 60 days. What we've been asked to consider is not to proceed with a new contract, not to modify the contract, anything else, but to provide them the spending authority to at least negotiate this to make a mutually agreeable decision, or not. The decision may be, let's let this happen. At the end of the day, maybe this is the only thing we can do. We'll just continue with the current contract. Burlington will close because that's in the contract. They can do that. But I think we were asked on this in this late hour because not only did we go with the lowest forecast, the current level of our offenders in the prison system is far below even what the lowest forecast was today. The March 31st forecast was, I can't remember, a couple hundred offenders below even the lowest forecast. And it just came out a couple months ago. So I don't want to belabor this, but there are options. But if we don't at least appropriate some money for this discussion, there will not be a discussion between the contractor and the executive branch, and that could be unfortunate. We may wish next year that we'd had those discussions, and that's why we thought it was prudent to set this money aside, or appropriate this money at least for those discussions. It's not a bailout. There is no new contract yet, but what we've been asked to do as a legislature is appropriate $3 more to the executive branch so they could have good faith discussions in this to decide what to do for the benefit of all involved, not just the prison, not just the company, not just the city, not just the students, but to look at the whole environment here and make a deliberate decision on this facility. And for my part, I'm not mad about this one way or the other, but I think we do need a little bit more planning, and that's what they're asking for. So I would ask for an aye vote in conclusion on the committee report.
Is there further discussion on the committee report? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of the conference committee report on House Bill 1405. Are there any no votes? Senator Aguilar? Senator Ulibarri? Senator Kerr? Senator Carroll? Minority Leader Guzman? Senator Merrifield? Senator Johnston? Senator Hill. Senator Holbert. Senator Baumgartner. With 24 ayes, 10 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, the Conference Committee report to House Bill 1405 is adopted. To the bill. Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the readoption of House Bill 1405.
Is there further discussion? Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will be supporting the budget today. And the reason I will be supporting it is because this is our way as state government for providing for the people in our state. And I'm happy for the work that the Joint Budget Committee did in trying to finally cut around all the limitations we had in our budget. But I'm dismayed that we know that there are battles going on around other ways to allow us funds to truly meet the needs of our state. And I think the example we just heard about is a quintessential example of why it is we need the state government and what value there is to state tax funds. And I hope that as the session continues and our ability to address the issue about whether or not we have enough funds in our state budget to help those areas of our state that need assistance, like Burlington, like the ambulance systems, like people being held on mental health holds, that we will keep this moment in our minds and keep our minds open to freeing up our state budget and allowing us to do the people's work. So I am happy to be a yes vote this morning.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the readoption of House Bill 1405. Are there any no votes? Senator Marble, Senator Kerr, Senator Neville, Senator Hill, Senator Holbert. With 29 ayes, 5 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1405 is readopted. Co-sponsors. Mr. Majority Leader, Senator Lundberg, Senator Roberts, Senator Tate, Senator Stedman, Senator Stedman, Senator Garcia, Senator Stedman, Senator John, Senator Stedman, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Newell, Senator Stedman, Senator Hodge, Senator Lambert, and Senator Stedman, and Senator Todd, and Senator Stedman. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to House Bill 1415?
House Bill 1415 by Representative Hamner, Senator Stedman, concerning the manner in which the state funds driver and vehicle services by the Division of Motor Vehicles of the Department of Revenue in connection therewith making and reducing an appropriation.
Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the first report of the First Conference Committee on House Bill 1415. Colleagues, the Conference Committee report, this is the bill concerning the fees at the Division of Motor Vehicles for your driver's license renewals, commercial driver's license, identification cards. And if you'll recall, we put an amendment on last week here on the Senate floor that provided an additional allowance to counties that operate driver's license offices for them to retain a larger fee for their participation in providing this service to residents of our state. We, in conference committee, put that fee increase for the counties on the same 3-year track that the DMV fees are on in the remainder of the bill. They will increase $2 in the first year, another $2 in the second year, and $1 on top of that in the third year. They will get the $5 increase that the body voted to amend into the bill. It's just going to take them 3 years to get there, which makes all the numbers and the math work out for all the other fee increases. The objective of this bill is to get the Division of Motor Vehicles into a sustainable position with its fee structure and its cash funds, and by slowing down this increase to the counties to phase it in, just like we're phasing in other changes at the DMV, this makes all the numbers work. Hopefully, this is a happy ending to the story, and I'll ask for your aye vote.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you. And a question for the senator from Denver. Actually, I don't think we're increasing the fee that goes to the county. It's the amount of the fee that they collect that they that they retain and don't have to return to the state. The fact is, they provide the service right now, but they don't get the fee for service that the state says that the state needs to operate to do this, because the state's taking it and not actually providing it to the subdivision of the states, which are called counties, that actually do this, and in some cases do more than half the provision of these services in individual counties compared to the state. So I just want to make clear, this is not actually in the conference committee report a fee increase. It's just the amount that they can retain for the services that they actually provide and are now not getting their fair share of the fees. So I would ask body for a aye vote on the conference committee report.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of the first conference committee report on House Bill 1415. Are there any no votes? Senator Baumgartner? Senator, conference committee report on 1415. Senator Baumgartner is a yes. With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, the first report of the first conference committee on House Bill 1415 is adopted. To the bill, Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the readoption of House Bill 1415.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the readoption of House Bill 1415. Are there any no votes? Senator Marble? Senator Neville? Senator Baumgartner? Senator Sonnenberg? With 30 ayes, 4 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1415 is readopted. Would anybody like to co-sponsor with Senator Stedman? Co-sponsors. Senator Stedman? Senator Lambert. Please add the president. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to House Bill 1165?
House Bill 1165 by Representatives Becker, Kay, and Landgraf, and Senator Crowder concerning statutory changes based on the recommendations in the report of the 2013 to 2015 Colorado Child Support Commission.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt the first report of the first conference committee.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of the first report of the first conference committee of House Bill 1165. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, the report of the first conference committee is adopted. Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the readoption of House Bill 1165.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the readoption of House Bill 1165. Are there any no votes? Senator Sonnenberg? Senator Neville? Senator Marble? Senator Lambert? With 30 ayes, 4 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1165 is readopted. Co-sponsors. Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the titles of the bills on the third reading of bills, consent calendar?
Senate Bill 156 by Senator Sheffield and Guzman and Representatives Duran and Del Grosso concerning certain legislative oversight committees in connection therewith modifying the manner in which members are appointed to the committees, allowing temporary appointments to the committees, and specifying that the chair and vice chair of the executive committee of the Legislative Council also serve as chair and vice chair of the Legislative Council. House Bill 1317 by Representative Williams, Senator Holbert concerning clarifying the types of transactions that may be included in a motor vehicle service contract. Senate Bill 172 by Senator Woods and Representatives Tyler and Buck concerning the election by a person to receive electronic notification of certain information from a county relating to a pending property tax dispute. Senate Bill 177 by Senators Martinez, Minnick, and Heath and Representatives Holding and Lawrence concerning technical modifications to legislation enacted in 2015 to promote an equitable financial contribution among affected public bodies in connection with urban redevelopment projects allocating tax revenues.
Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt all the bills listed on the third reading of bills for final passage consent calendar, which includes Senate Bill 156, House Bill 1317, Senate Bill 172, and Senate Bill 177.
Is there further discussion on any of the bills on the third reading of bills consent calendar? Seeing none, are there any no votes on any of the bills? With 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 156 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Senator Heath. With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1317 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Senator Baumgardner. Senator Woods. With 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 172 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Mr. Majority Leader. Senator Baumgardner. Senator Lambert. Senator Holbert. Senator Cook. Senator Marble. Senator Lundberg. Senator Kafalis. With 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 177 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Mr. Majority Leader. Third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to House Bill 1156?
House Bill 1156 by Representatives Danielson, Salazar, and Senators Donovan and Heath concerning the prohibition of an action against an employee for sharing wage information.
Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate lay over House Bill 1156 to April 19th.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1156 will lay over until April 19th. Mr. Majors, please read the title to House Bill 1268.
House Bill 1268 by Representative Foot and Senator Cook concerning district attorney's representation in certain hearings arising from interstate supervision compacts.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1268 on third reading and final passage and ask for an aye vote.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1268 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1268 is adopted. Co-sponsors: Senator Crowder, Senator Woods, Senator Lambert, Senator Marble, Senator Grantham, Senator Lundberg, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Neville, Mr. Majority Leader, Senator Baumgartner, Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to Senate Bill 111?
Senate Bill 111 by Senator Lambert and Representative Lundin concerning authorizing the Colorado Mountain Rangers as certified reserve peace officers.
Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 111 on third reading and final passage, and I do not offer or ask request for third reading amendment.
You've heard the motion. We're thinking about it. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion for the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 111 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 111 is adopted. Co-sponsors: Senator Kafalis, Senator Todd, Senator Holbert, Senator Crowder, Senator Grantham, Senator Tate, Senator Merrifield, Majority Leader Shuffle, Senator Baumgartner, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to House Bill 1335?
House Bill 1335 by Representatives Pabon, Melton, and Senator Stedman concerning the unlawful sale of certain publicly provided government services.
Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1335 on third reading and final passage.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1335 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Marble, Senator Woods, Senator Neville, Senator Cook, Senator Tate, Senator Baumgartner, Senator Holbert, Senator Lambert, Senator Lundberg, Senator Grantham, with 23 ayes, 11 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, House Bill 1335 is adopted. Co-sponsors: Senator Jones, Senator Ulibarri, Senator Carroll, Senator Donovan, Senator Hodge, Minority Leader Guzman, Senator Merrifield, Senator Heath, Senator Todd, Senator Kerr, Senator Johnston, Senator Newell, second wave. General Order, second reading of bills. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate lay over the General Order second reading of bills calendar to April 18th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will lay over the second reading General Orders calendar until April 18th. Consideration of resolutions. Majority Leader Scheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate lay over the balance of the consideration of resolutions calendars to April 18th.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The consideration of resolutions calendar will lay over until April 18th. Consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the appointments? Belay that. Consideration of House amendments to Senate bills. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to Senate Bill 58?
Senate Bill 58 by Senator Hill and Representative Becker K. concerning the regulation of certain foods in connection therewith exempting certain food producers from licensure, inspection, and other regulation, and making an appropriation.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate concur with House amendments to Senate Bill 58.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I tried to make some changes into how we were doing the classes for producing cottage foods. We got some feedback that those changes were actually making things more difficult, and so the House just took those changes out, so we're not making any changes now to how the House, or to how we're doing classes for producing cottage foods, and ask for your support.
Is there further discussion? The motion before the body is that the Senate concur with House amendments to Senate Bill 58. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, the Senate concurs with House amendments to Senate Bill 58. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the readoption of Senate Bill 58.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the readoption of Senate Bill 58. Are there any no votes? Senator Carroll. Senator Aguilar. Senator John. Senator John, no vote. With 31 ayes, 3 noes, 0 absent, 1 excuse, Senate Bill 58 is readopted. Co-sponsors: Senator Holbert, Senator Woods, Senator Cook, Senator Marble, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Tate, Senator Donovan, Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to Senate Bill 80?
Senate Bill 80 by Senator Newell and Representatives Wist and Pabon concerning secured marijuana cultivation requirements.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate lay over Senate Bill 80 to April 18th.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 80 will lay over until April 18th. Mr. Majors, would you please read the title to Senate Bill 145?
Senate Bill 145 by Senators Baumgardner and Donovan, Representatives Mitch Bush and Willett concerning an alternative mechanism for creating a subdistrict of the Colorado River Water Conservation District.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate concur with House amendments to Senate Bill 145.
Is there further discussion? Senator Baumgardner.
Yes, thank you. Senate Bill 145 comes back to us for concurrence, consistent with the House's incessant need to nitpick. The amendment, they amended our solid public policy Senate bill just because they could. They added a specific reference on page 2, line 23, simply because it does absolutely nothing except puts a number back in.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to expound upon this. We added a parentheses and the number 2.
Is there further discussion? Senator Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a question, clarification question of the bill sponsors. Are you asking us to vote for or against the House amendment?
Please direct your questions to the presiding officer. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's a good question to ask. Clarification needed. We are asking for support of the number 2 and its accompanying parentheses.
Colleagues, it's tax day. Some of us have some things to file. Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise with a question. I need the sponsors to help me understand. What does it mean when the numbers are in parentheses?
Seeing no further discussion, is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of the House amendment to Senate Bill 145. Are there any no votes? Please add the president. With 33 ayes, 1 no, 0 absent, 1 excuse, House amendments to Senate Bill 145 are adopted. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the repassage of Senate Bill 145.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the readoption of Senate Bill 145. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 145 is readopted. Co-sponsors. Senator Woods. Consideration of governor's appointments, consent calendar. Mr. Majors, would you please read the appointment?
Member of the Colorado Lottery Commission for a term expiring July 1, 2016, still Peterson of Arvada, Colorado, serves as member of the Republican and is Democratic kitchen by the resignation of Francis Ann Concilia of Littleton, Colorado, appointed.
Majority Leader Sheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate confirm the governor's appointments detailed on the consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar, which includes a member of the Colorado Lottery Commission.
Is there further discussion on the appointment? Seeing none, are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, Stella Peterson is appointed as a member of the Colorado Lottery Commission. Announcements. There is an announcement. There's a message from the House. It will be announced.
April 15, 2016, Mr. President, the House has adopted and transmits herewith House Joint Resolution 1018.
Announcements. Senator Newell? No? Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. And for those of you that were planning on participating on Bikers Day at the Capitol, which was scheduled for the 18th, I believe, because of the weather, they have moved that back to the 21st. I would just ask you to make a note of that. Tiger had sent me a note and asked me to let you know. So thank you, Mr. President.
Further announcements? Colleagues, I have a little bit, actually, I have a sad announcement. I want you to offer us a little bit of extra consideration going forward. My aide has left the state. Her mother was in a critical accident last night in Florida. Please keep her and her family in her prayers, and we will work with you as best as we can as she is taking care of her family. So thanks for your consideration. Senator Sheffel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn to 10 a.m. Monday, the 18th day of April.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will stand adjourned till 10 a.m. Monday, April 18th, or February.